mic check, please.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Ducks Unlimited podcast. I'm your host, Chris Jennings.
I'm your host, Dr. Mike Brazier.
My name is John Gordon. I'll be your host.
And I'm your host, Katie Burke.
Welcome to the Ducks Unlimited podcast, the only podcast about all things waterfowl. From hunting insights to science-based discussions about ducks, geese, and issues affecting waterfowl and wetlands conservation in North America. The DU Podcast, sponsored by Purina Pro Plan, the official performance dog food of Ducks Unlimited. Purina Pro Plan, always advancing.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Ducks Unlimited podcast. I'm your host, Chris Jennings. Joining me on the DU podcast once again is Kevin Kraai, the Texas Waterfowl Program Leader. How are you, Kevin?
I'm doing quite well. And yourself?
Doing well. We are on the precipice. We are right up against the opener for our duck season, at least where I hunt in Arkansas. I know you guys in Texas open randomly with the size of the state. There's different openers here and there. I know some of the guys that did open, I've heard some pretty good reports, and but I wanted to get you on here today. We could just go through Texas. We can talk about what the habitat looks like, what it looked like going into and coming out of teal season, going into the big duck regular season, and then what really we're going to be looking at as duck hunters really hit the ground running, probably, after Thanksgiving into December.
Yes, sir.
So let's go ahead and start with, going into teal season, the habitat that you guys had, because I know we did some migration alerts where we were talking about it's really dry, and I started getting some emails from people up that live where you do in northern Texas. We're like, hey man, it ain't dry. So
for sure.
Especially from my co-host, Dr. Mike Brazier, he always has to send a corrective email if there's anything, and I'm trying to explain to him, like, it said South Texas, man, it's not all of Texas. But yeah, let's go ahead and kick that off, and just kind of wanted to hear how teal season was and how the habitat looked going into it.
Yeah. The good and the bad of Texas is that it's huge. And so, it's definitely conditions are typically, and once again this year, very different from one end of the state to the other. And so, going into September, we were experiencing extreme to near record drought throughout most of the state of Texas. And so literally the only place that really wasn't in that kind of extreme drought condition was the high plains of the Texas Panhandle, dominated by plow wetlands. And that's purely because of a record May for the most part. In my house alone, just outside Amarillo, we had just under 25 inches of rain in the month of May alone, which, it was, beyond record. The year prior, we had 11 inches of rain the entire year. So extreme rain events that we were experiencing up here. And for the most part, after May, kind of like everything these days, the water faucet cut off and really haven't had any input since. But that extreme rain event certainly persisted throughout the summer, even though we lost quite a bit of water. But right now, we're probably sitting as good as we had in the last decade for surface water in the high plains. So it's certainly not uniform across the entire high plains, but there is pockets where there's abundant water. The only unfortunate thing about it is that, we really don't grow aquatic vegetation up here. Once water hits the landscape, this landscape, it really needs that dry cycle so that, terrestrial vegetation, emergent vegetation can grow and then hope to get that flooded later in the year. So when that water hit the landscape, it really kind of prevented, the really good duck foods, if you will, the moist soil plants from germinating and growing and then getting flooded. So the reality is a lot of the water that's on the landscape up here is just kind of big, open, receded water with not a lot of vegetation in it. And so it's not, the most ducky looking stuff, but things like sandhill cranes and pintails and green-winged teal, they're going to do just fine. And the reality of this landscape is those birds are here because we have abundant waste grain with, the corn agriculture and milo and winter wheat and things. So they're really not coming here to get foods out of the supply. They're coming here to have a place to swim so they can go out to fields. So We'll see. It's looking pretty good. And as you mentioned, we are open everywhere statewide now for ducks and geese. The High Plains zone opened a couple weeks ago. Our South zone opened about a week ago, and then our North zone opened this past weekend. So, we're wide open. The rest of the state going into teal season was bad, really bad. But, we have, that phenomenon, if you will, along the Texas coast and our rice belt, where we're very fortunate to have ducks, and duck hunting is big business. It's very, very commercial now. And we have a number of private landowners and hunting clubs that really, really think of it as a business. And they spend a lot of time, money, and energy making sure that there's good habitat on the landscape. And even in a drought, they're obviously got straws in the ground, pumping groundwater, creating amazing habitat. And man, they rolled into teal season, with a very, very dry North Texas, a very dry Northeast Texas, a very dry East Central Texas, for the most part, a very dry flyway, all the way up through Kansas and the Dakotas, until you get to the Dakotas, it was very dry. And so when those blue wings left, Prairie, Canada and Dakota, they, if they didn't stop in the Texas Panhandle, they made it all the way down the Texas coast. And for the most part, the only water on the landscape was that artificial water that hunters were pumping up. And those individuals had just an absolute spectacular teal season. They were literally the only water on the landscape. As you get really close to that coastal zone, a long, hot, dry summer really had all of our marshes near hypersaline, very little aquatic foods. And so those locations where they had that sweet, fresh water was really where it, the attraction of those birds occurred. And so, yeah, I did hear that, kind of a little bit more than normal, some of the reservoirs of Northeast Texas, the upper ends of those things, and some of those creeks had a little bit of a bump in hunting success. That's just a sign of a lack of freshwater on the landscape and a lack of places for teal to go during that migration period. That whole teal season is full on migration. Those birds are moving as fast as they can. And so, wherever they can find fresh water, they found it. And I heard some pretty good stories of some of the larger reservoirs in East Texas that had some pretty good days in the upper ends of those lakes and that real shallow water. So yeah, it was real hit or miss, unfortunately. If you had good water and good habitat, the birds were there in abundance. I'm just fearful, and I know that there's a lot of people that didn't even have a place to go hunting. And if they did, it was the conditions were so bad that they didn't see a lot of birds. So our public WMAs probably had one of the worst teal seasons we've ever had. And that's, all of our public WMAs along the coast are right against that coastal zone and that area where we hope to have fresh water, but we just didn't have it this year. So yeah, unfortunately it was pretty bad.
Yeah. Usually, it seems like, I think we've said it the last several years, that coastal zone going into the season is super dry. Mm-hmm. But you guys have gotten lucky with like a tropical storm that would maybe pick up, and you guys pick up some rain. It just didn't happen this year, at least during teal season.
No, just prior to teal season, we had a system move into South Texas. That brush country, typically known for bobwhites and whitetails, Corpus Christi South. Yeah. And there's just not a lot of duck hunters out in that landscape. So, it didn't hit our really important duck hunting areas like we hope. And so, that just didn't occur.
Now, leading up to the regular season, you guys have had some water, especially even in that coastal zone. You guys have had some water. How have things improved? We'll start out down there, kind of leading up to foreshadowing and talking about the regular duck season here. I guess not foreshadowing because it's open, but how has that water changed that habitat down there?
Well, we've definitely seen improvements in a couple different places in the state. Like you said, the coastal zone. This past weekend, I was down there all last week for some meetings and going on, and pretty much starting Thursday on all the way up until yesterday, or maybe even Monday, it has pretty much been raining nonstop. Pretty light, but consistent rain. Improvements for sure is all I can say. There's some areas that, we saw 3, 4, 5, 6 inches of rain over that multi-day period. That landscape was really dry. Those soils were really, really dry and sucked up a lot of that water. But the important part is, that's the beginning of the healing. You got to start somewhere, and getting those soils saturated such that, they might not all be ponding water right now, but hopefully that next system, that really helps. But it did help a little bit. Our coastal WMAs have been open for a couple weeks and in that south zone, and pretty much every single one of them were turning away hunters because we just simply don't have the spots for people to hunt. Record numbers, some of them 100 plus hunters were saying we don't have anywhere for you to hunt. And so anything helps right now. And I really haven't heard if that greatly improved or improved at all, if we added any huntable sites since this weekend. We are just only 2 days removed from it. So hopefully we'll know more here in the next day or two, coming into the weekend hunts, that hopefully we added a few spots. But, that's a really good indicator of how things are if we're turning away 100 plus hunters on our wildlife management areas, simply because we just, the only water we have is these saline waters, which aren't really good. And so we're not seeing good hunter success right now.
Yeah. I'm just curious, how does that impact the redheads out on the bays, like some of the diving ducks that are hitting out there in Laguna Madre?
I was out in the bay system this past weekend with a rod and reel largely in my hand, but didn't see a lot of birds. At all. And the impact to them is the proximity of fresh water. And so, they got to visit fresh water at least once, if not 2 times a day, to purge those salt, the salt that they're getting out of the seagrasses that they're foraging on. And, if there's not fresh water nearby, they're just not going to be in that area. That food source is not going to be useful to them because they have to be able to get to fresh water nearby. And so it was pretty clear in that mid coast system that I was in that there just wasn't a lot of birds, and there wasn't a lot of, and I'm assuming that means there's not a lot of fresh water nearby. But like I said earlier, that deep South Texas is in real close proximity that got that tropical storm in September. They actually received more rain than anybody this weekend. That Corpus Christi, Kingsville area going south.
Down to like Baffin.
All the way down. Yeah, absolutely. So that's real close proximity to Lower Laguna Madre, Baffin Bay, the heart of our remaining redhead country. And so I'm real hopeful that means that there's some new fresh water on the landscape. Some of those ponds caught water, and you'll see a direct impact to our redhead population as soon as that. Those two things kind of collide, if you will. If you get fresh water nearby, the bay system itself, for the most part, is pretty healthy. In the eyes of a redhead, they're looking for seagrasses and shoal grasses and things like that. And they just need to have that fresh water nearby. So that probably is a huge improvement from where we were a couple of weeks ago for diving ducks in our bay systems. But it, going up all the way up into the southeast Texas, Orange County, Beaumont, they're still in record drought. And, and that's our highest rainfall counties in the state, north of 60 inches a year. And they're way, way behind right now and didn't get a lot of relief this past weekend at all.
Yeah. And kind of looking at the forecast there, it looks like there's some rain in the forecast, which is a good thing.
Right.
I talked to some guys who hunt Southwest Louisiana, and they were, they're dry as a bone out there, have been for a little while.
Yeah.
I mean, even like you said, some guys didn't even get to hunt teal because it was so dry.
Yeah.
It looks like there's kind of a trough setting up that maybe could pump quite a bit of rain in there, get some precipitation, and could help everybody out. So
yeah, looking at long-term forecasts, we're looking at, especially Southeast and East Texas, we're looking at kind of what you would consider a little bit more normal weather events setting up, decent chances of rain, every other day and stuff like that. So hopefully we're seeing a big change. And, as far as Northeast Texas, Dallas, the Louisiana border, we had a really big rain event. Oh man, 3 weeks ago, where, a significant portion of Dallas and Fort Worth flooded. The one good thing about a dry summer for reservoir type hunters that, dominates our Northeast Texas area is that receded reservoir with a bunch of shoreline exposed is good because that's growing, foods and terrestrial plants and weeds and grasses and things that are very important. So with all those reservoirs receded all summer long, the shoreline's pretty fuzzy and has a lot of kilocalories in it right now. And that rain event, it didn't cause any flooding in rivers or anything like that, but it definitely brought up a majority of those reservoirs in East Texas just prior to the opener. And so some of them went from 2, 3, 4 feet low to either full or just like a half foot low. So, that 2, 3, 4 foot of new water pushed back into that vegetation really, really did help our North Texas opener, which was this past Saturday. And so, that was good. And I've heard some decent reports. If anything, it just gave us more areas, more surface water for hunters to hunt. And so, that was good. And then that correlated very closely with that big front we had last week. It wasn't Arctic temps by any means, but most of the state was in, 30s, 40s, and 50s, which is the first real good push of cold weather, or cool weather we've had for the year. And so timing couldn't have been better for those 2 rain events.
Stay tuned to the Ducks Unlimited podcast, sponsored by Purina Pro Plan, after these messages.
With that slight cold front, I know it's a much more drastic cold front way further north, but
right.
Did you hear any reports of noticing, some bird movement with that? I mean,
yeah, for sure. Saturday morning, heard some really, really good reports from public land, from RWMAs to public reservoirs. Unfortunately, all too often we're hearing this similar pattern of, Saturday morning good, Sunday morning was terrible. Just completely 2 different sides of the coin, the number of birds they saw, the number of birds harvested. And so it's just that continued issue we're seeing with birds are just less and less willing to deal with the pressure, and they're just intolerant. And so you're just, Saturday morning was great, Sunday morning was terrible. So, they're just needing rest. They're needing, already just a few days into the season, we're needing new birds.
Yeah, that's scary.
So, here we are. Yeah, exactly. Here we are looking north, hoping for weather, hoping for rain. The thing that brings birds to East Texas is rain events. It's water. We don't have, a bunch of agricultural crops like Kansas and Nebraska and Arkansas has to bring birds there, that brings that kilocalorie on the landscape, that energy on the landscape, that birds will just go sit in a pond and fly out to a field. Everything that comes to East Texas and Central Texas has to make a living in the water at which it swims. And so it's those rain events, that big rain events where we're flooding, new habitat, where either, you have that overbank flood event in our rivers, like the Sulphur, the Red, the Sabine, the Trinity, all these very, very important rivers. When they get out of their banks, that's when we get that huge push of ducks that we, are used to in Northeast Texas. And because that's when we got new foods on the landscape, new foods exposed to ducks. And until we get that event, we're going to continue to be looking north, hoping something happens, like freeze events further north and things like that. And so that's kind of what we're hoping for now.
Yeah. And I think, having the pretty much same conversations with, other state agency biologists, and, Arkansas is very similar in a sense that as soon as they start getting shot at, they don't stick around for very much longer. So
no, if there's not places for them to go get away and, relax and hide, and a dry year, certainly, especially for those that have water, you see increases in success, but they got to be really, really, they got to walk lightly. They got to tread lightly when it comes to how they're hunting the birds to keep them in the landscape. But if, opening day comes along and every little puddle, there's a gun in the blind, that's when you see landscape level exodus by ducks. They just we're not tolerating it. And so they'll go hide wherever they can hide, stop ponds or completely leave the landscape for a while. And so if we get those big rain events and there's a ton of habitat on the landscape, that's when you can get a little more aggressive with the hunting and hunt multiple days in a row and see success multiple days in a row. And so, we need rain. We need it bad.
Yeah. I think that's a story all throughout, the South right now. Everyone's really needing some rain. One thing I was going to ask you, did you see any geese or hear from anybody reporting any geese, whether it's light geese or specks or even the Canadas up north that kind of trickle in up there? Are you guys starting to see those yet?
Starting, but the Texas goose situation is pretty bleak right now.
Yeah.
We're sitting on the lowest goose estimates we've ever had. A year removed from that, we're sitting on the lowest harvest estimates for geese we've ever had. We're sitting on a year removed from the lowest number of goose hunters we've ever had. It's largely driven by the things happening on the Texas coast and that historic landscape. With that being said, it is a different story as you move up into the rolling plains and the high plains, where we have, big concentrations of white-fronted geese north of Abilene and Knox and Haskell County, and then, the Playa wetlands and the cackling Canada geese that we have up here. They are trickling in. We have marked, telemetry, marked birds, both white fronts and cackling geese. They have started trickling into the state and returning to the areas in which they were caught last year. And so that is occurring. Very, very few birds have been showing up on the Texas coast yet. So, there's birds, but definitely late, but very few. Some rumors of some enormous concentrations of birds in Kansas right now, especially white-fronted geese. But the cackling geese, they're on time. They're doing their thing in the Panhandle. They're showing up. Even some light geese, typically Ross geese in this part of the world, in the Panhandle, they're starting to show up. But been on the phone today with my colleagues in the Dakotas, and they're out spraying weeds right now. The week before Thanksgiving, and it's 65 degrees. So pretty unprecedented warming trend for that part of the world. But looking at long-term forecasts, right around Thanksgiving, it looks like things are going to lock up for them as well.
Yeah, they had that early cold and locked up pretty good across most of North Dakota.
Big blizzard came through there. Yeah.
Yeah, and everyone's like, "Oh, we're in business," and then it opened back up. But that's typically how it is.
Opened right back up.
That was kind of the last thing I'll ask you here. Last year during the season, I'll be honest, the guys I know who hunt in Texas, there was a lot of grumbling there throughout December. They were still warm. They were still dry. And my phone's blowing up with these guys. They're talking to me. But I'll tell you what, come about January 3rd last year, they got a bunch of rain. And I never got another phone call because those guys did awesome. They finished their season really strong. So, is that something that you're kind of hoping for once again, for Texas hunters?
Well, I hope it comes earlier.
Yeah.
I hope it comes earlier.
Absolutely.
January 3rd, most of the season's over. So, we need those big rain events. It's not just about, getting the cold weather and freezing ponds and rivers and things north of us. It's that big rain event that is so attractive to waterfowl. And you'll see huge movements the second that starts happening. And not just from the north. We're talking about attracting ducks from the east and the west. Those are the things that we need. And hopefully we can start getting some of that. We need those floods in Northeast Texas. We need that entire coastal complex from the bay system all the way into the marshes, into the rice prairies, to start getting water on the landscape like immediately to kind of keep us going for this season. Otherwise, I think we're going to be looking at a very frustrating season for many as, we move into, like I said, just a few days into the season, we're already wishing for new ducks. And that is not common, and that is not something we like to be doing right now.
Well, with luck, we'll have our fingers crossed here. I know having that landscape level water is really, I know it, you know it, but it's hard to get across to some listeners even that that landscape level water is beneficial for everyone and the ducks.
Right.
So
absolutely.
Hopefully we'll keep our fingers crossed, and you guys will get that. Anything else you want to mention in regards to Texas waterfowl while I got you on here?
No, not really. Things are just complicated and moving along, and we're gonna keep on trucking and doing some really cool research and continue to mark some of these cackling geese as they get here, and finishing up some really cool pintail research. And so there's just a lot of cool stuff going on right now.
Awesome. Well, maybe we can get you on here at some point in the next few months, or once you guys wrap up that pintail research. I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah. Sounds like a great plan.
Cool. All right, Kevin, I appreciate it. Thanks for your time. And we'll probably reach out to you once. I'm going to watch that weather, wait till you guys just get dumped on with a bunch of rain throughout the whole state. And I'm going to call you, and we just want nothing but good news.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're going to do. I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Thanks a lot, Kevin.
Thank you, Chris.
I'd like to thank my guest, Kevin Kraai, the Texas Waterfowl Program Leader, for coming on today and just providing a little update right now on what the habitat and hunting looks like across the entire state of Texas. I'd like to thank our producer, Chris Isaac, for putting the show together and getting it out to you. And I'd like to thank you, the listener, for joining me on DU Podcast and supporting wetlands conservation.
Thank you for listening to the DU Podcast, sponsored by Purina Pro Plan, the official performance dog food of Ducks Unlimited. Purina Pro Plan, always advancing. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show, and visit ducks.org/DU Podcast. Opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect those of Ducks Unlimited. Until next time, stay tuned to the Ducks.